Antonio Gozakowski was planning to leave the United States Army next month and go to college. Gozakowski, an Army sergeant, has served 6 years in the military. His goal in college was to expand his medical skills, become a dentist, and then return to the Army in a few years. But the coronavirus health crisis is forcing universities to consider online classes or reduced schooling. So, Gozakowski decided to sign up for a new Army program and extend his military service for 6 more months. Concerns about future jobs or college classes are driving more U.S. military members to either remain in the armed forces or delay leaving. The weakened economic conditions make the job security, guaranteed pay, and benefits of the military much more appealing. Gozakowski said, "Everything from elementary schools to universities is closing down, and there's no saying how it's going to go when the fall semester opens." He told the Associated Press that the military provides work and guaranteed wages. Gozakowski is one of hundreds of armed forces members who have accepted short-term extensions being offered by the military. As of last week, the Army had already passed its goal of keeping 50,000 soldiers for the fiscal year. More than 52,000 have signed up for the extensions. The Navy and other military services also have met or are closer than planned to their target numbers. The large number of individuals choosing to stay in the armed forces will make up for any shortage in the number of new recruits resulting from the coronavirus pandemic. That will help the military meet its total required troop levels for the end of the year. Army Sergeant Major Stuart Morgan provides career guidance to armed forces members. He says the Army's program lets members postpone their departure for up to 11 months. By early last week, he said, 745 soldiers had signed up. What we're seeing this year, which is directly related to COVID, is we do have a population of soldiers that what they were expecting at the end of transition has suddenly disappeared, Morgan said. And now you have a soldier that is trying to go through a transition period that is now facing uncertainty on the outside. The U.S. Air Force is already expecting to fall short of its recruiting goal by as much as 5,800 because of the virus. The Air Force said that shortfall could be filled by individuals who decide to extend their military service. So far, the number of Air Force members who have asked to extend their service is 700 more than at this time last year. Retention is also on the rise in the U.S. Marine Corps. Currently, there are about 183,000 Marines. The goal for the end of the fiscal year is about 184,600. The Marine Corps has nearly reached its retention goal of about 12,600 for the fiscal year. I'm Jonathan Evans.
And over to Gandalf for a commentary on this news story, which came out recently this month. Go ahead, Gandalf.
Yeah, this is a remarkable news story, with the exception of the case of that one ship in the Pacific, there's been very little coverage about the coronavirus and how it's affected the U.S. military. I mean, considering that this is a national crisis, probably the biggest national crisis since 9/11, how the military handles it and how the military is affected by it is an extremely important thing to watch. I remember well after 9/11, people were signing up for the military based on, wanting to serve their country because of fears of Islamic terrorism. Now it seems like people are not wanting to leave the military because they don't think there's going to be any job security outside of the military. So military is actually meeting recruitment and retention goals because people do not want to face the uncertainty of what looks to be a pretty severely collapsing economy. Wealthiest hospitals got billions in bailout for struggling health providers, as reported by Jesse Drucker over at MSN. A multi-billion-dollar institution in the Seattle area invests in hedge funds, runs a pair of venture capital funds, and works with elite private equity firms like the Carlyle Group. Remember, the Carlyle Group at one point was in business with the Bush and the Bin Laden families. So we're talking some wealthy folks here. But it's not just another deep-pocket investor hunting for high returns. Who, pray tell, is this? It is the Providence Health System, one of the country's largest and richest hospital chains. It is sitting on nearly $12 billion in cash, which it invests, Wall Street style, in a good year, generating more than $1 billion in profits. And this spring, Providence received at least $509 million in government funds, one of many wealthy beneficiaries of a public federal program that is supposed to prevent healthcare providers from capsizing during the coronavirus pandemic. With states restricting hospitals from performing non-essential services, their revenue has shriveled. The Department of Health and Human Services has disbursed $72 billion in grants since April to hospitals and other healthcare providers throughout the bailout program, which is part of the coronavirus economic stimulus package. The department plans to eventually distribute more than $100 billion more. Yet so far, the riches are flowing in large part to hospitals that had already built up deep financial reserves to help them withstand an economic storm. Smaller, poorer hospitals are receiving tiny amounts of federal aid by comparison. I'll note that rural hospital closings have been actually one of the most underreported stories of the decline of small town America. Oftentimes, rural hospitals are the major employment in an entire county or region, and they are not getting bailed out by and large. 20 large recipients of this hospital aid, including Providence, have received a total of more than $5 billion in recent weeks, according to analysis of federal data by Good Jobs First, a research group. Those hospital chains were already sitting on more than $108 billion in cash, according to regulatory filings and the bond rating firms S&P, Global, and Fitch. A Providence spokeswoman said that the grants help make up for losses from the coronavirus. After the coronavirus stimulus was passed in March, hospital industry lobbyists reached out to senior health and human services officials to discuss how the money would be distributed. Well, I'm so glad that Health and Human Services is helping out companies that sit on collectively more than $12 billion in cash. I'm just wondering about Health and Human Services helping the little poor country hospital that's sitting on a lot less than that.
Well, some people are being helped.
Well, yeah, some people are being helped. I'm glad someone's being helped.
Yeah, they're helping themselves.
Yeah. The looting phase of history. Representatives of the American Hospital Association, a lobbying group for the country's largest hospitals, communicated with Alex Azar, the department secretary, And Eric Hargan, the deputy secretary overseeing the funds, said Tom Nichols, a lobbyist for the group. Chip Kahn, president of the Federation of American Hospitals, which lobbies on behalf of for-profit hospitals, said he too had frequent discussions with the agency. Sure, they're lighting up the phones. The department then devised formulas to quickly dispense tens of billions of dollars to thousands of hospitals, and those formulas favored large, wealthy institutions. I just love it. I mean, every time we have an economic crisis, we hear all about little people demanding too much if they want, a check to help them out or the government to protect their jobs. But my God, when these large, wealthy institutions, they have a problem, we have to bend over backwards to save them all. One formula based allotments on how much money a hospital collected from Medicare last year. Another was based on a hospital's revenue. While Health and Human Services also created separate pots of funding for rural hospitals and those hit especially hard by the coronavirus, the department did not take into account each hospital's existing financial resources. Well, that's kind of opening the door to a moral hazard. I mean, why are you going to bail out people who have more? Why are you going to give more bailouts to people who already have more resources than give bailouts to hospitals and other public services that don't have resources? Doesn't make much sense to me. Hospitals that serve a greater proportion of wealthier, privately insured patients got twice as much relief as those focused on low-income patients with Medicaid or no coverage at all, according to a study this month by the Kaiser Family Foundation. Hospitals that serve poorer patients typically have thinner reserves to draw upon. Even before the coronavirus, roughly 400 hospitals in rural America were at risk of closing, said Alan Morgan, chief executive of the National Rural Hospital Association. On average, the country's 2,000 rural hospitals had enough cash to keep their doors open for only 30 days. So clearly this is economic terrorism on poor people, especially poor country people in the midst of a pandemic. So government has just become sort of an insider cronyist game. And if we're going to look out for the health of ordinary people, I think we have to put something above profit and political connections.
Yes, and as I was just saying to Gandalf earlier, and I thought this was an important point, is this corporate entity is actually legally bound to maximize profits for shareholders, so we shouldn't be all that surprised when stuff like this happens. It's simply entropy in a way. People are serving their own interests, which happens to be the interests of a corporate entity which delivers private profits. And when you think about that in the context of the public commons, it's kind of a zero-sum game. They are privatizing profits and socializing losses. And this race to social division via economic division, the rich getting richer and the poor falling behind, is appearing to be happening at an accelerated pace in the USA right now.
From the United States Department of Justice, a news release from a couple months ago, but it's worth remembering. Harvard University professor and 2 Chinese nationals charged in 3 separate China-related cases. The Department of Justice announced today that the chair of Harvard University's Chemistry and Chemical Biology Department and 2 Chinese nationals have been charged in connection with aiding the People's Republic of China. Dr. Charles Lieber, 60, chair of the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology at Harvard University, was arrested this morning and charged by criminal complaint with 1 count of making a materially false, fictitious, and fraudulent statement. Lieber will appear this afternoon before Magistrate Judge Marianne B. Bowler in federal court in Boston, Massachusetts. Yang King Yi, 29, a Chinese national, was charged in an indictment today with 1 count each of visa fraud, making false statements, acting as an agent of a foreign government, and conspiracy. Yi currently is in China. Zhang Songjing, 30, a Chinese national, was arrested on December 10th, 2019 at Boston's Logan International Airport. and charged by criminal complaint with attempting to smuggle 21 vials of biological research to China. On January 21st of this year, 2020, Zhang was indicted on one count of smuggling goods from the United States and one count of making false, fictitious, or fraudulent statements. He has been detained since December 30th, 2019. Dr. Charles Lieber, who, according to court documents since 2008, Dr. Lieber has served as the principal investigator of the Lieber Research Group at Harvard University, which specialized in the area of nanoscience, has received more than $15 million in grant funding from the National Institutes of Health and Department of Defense. These grants require the disclosure of significant foreign financial conflicts of interest, including financial support from a foreign government or a foreign entity. Unbeknownst to Harvard University beginning in 2011, Lieber became a quote-unquote strategic scientist at Wuhan University of Technology in China and was a contractual participant in China's 1,000 Talents programs from in or about 2012 to 2017. China's 1,000 Talents program is one of the most important Chinese talent recruitment plans that are designed to attract, recruit, and cultivate high-level scientific talent in furtherance of Chinese scientific development, economic prosperity, and national security. These talent programs seek to lure Chinese overseas talent and foreign experts to bring their knowledge and experience to China and reward individuals for stealing proprietary information. Under the terms of Lieber's 3-year 1,000 Talents contract, the Wuhan Institute of Technology paid Lieber $50,000 per month, living expenses of up to 1 million Chinese yuan, which is approximately $158,000 at the time, and awarded him more than $1.5 million to establish a research lab at the Wuhan University of Technology. In return, Lieber was obligated to work for the Wuhan University of Technology not less than 9 months a year by declaring international cooperation projects, cultivating young teachers and PhD students, organizing international conferences, applying for patents, and publishing articles in the name of the Wuhan University of Technology. The complaint alleges that in 2018 and 2019, Lieber lied about his involvement in the 1,000 Talents plan and affiliation with the Wuhan University of Technology. On or about April 24th of 2018, during an interview with investigators, Lieber stated that he was never asked to participate in the 1,000 Talents program, but he wasn't sure how China categorized him. In November of that year, 2018, the National Institutes of Health inquired of Harvard whether Lieber had failed to disclose his then suspected relationship with the Wuhan University of Technology and China's 1,000 Talents plan. Lieber caused Harvard to falsely tell NIH that Lieber had no formal association with the Wuhan University of Technology after 2012, that the Wuhan University of Technology continued to exaggerate his involvement with the institute in subsequent years, and that Lieber is not and has never been a participant in China's 1,000 Talents plan. Yang Yi, according to his indictment, Yi is lieutenant of the People's Liberation Army, the PLA, the armed forces of the People's Republic of China, and a member of the Communist Party, the CCP. On her J-1 visa application, Yi falsely identified herself as a quote-unquote student and lied about her ongoing military service at the National University of Defense Technology, a top military academy directed by the CCP. It is further alleged that while studying at Boston University's Department of Physics, Chemistry, and Biomedical Engineering from October 2017 to April 2019, Yi continued to work as a PLA lieutenant, completing numerous assignments from PLA officers, such as conducting research, assessing U.S. military websites, and sending U.S. documents and information to China. According to court documents, on April 20th, 2019, federal officers interviewed Yi at Boston's Logan International Airport. During the interview, it is alleged that Yi falsely claimed that she had minimal contact with two National University of Defense Technology professors who were high-ranking PLA officers. However, a search of Yi's electronic devices demonstrated the direction of one National University of Defense Technology professor, who was a PLA colonel. Yi had accessed U.S. military websites, researched U.S. military projects, and compiled information for the PLA on two U.S. scientists with expertise in robotics and computer science. Furthermore, a review of a WeChat conversation revealed that Yi and the other PLA official from the Chinese university were collaborating on a research paper about a risk assessment model designed to decipher data for military applications. During this interview, Yi admitted that she held the rank of lieutenant in the PLA and admitted to being a member of the CCP. Zhao Song Zhang. In August 2018, Zhang entered the United States on a J-1 visa and conducted cancer cell research at Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston from September 4th, 2018 to December 9th, 2019. It is alleged that on December 9th, 2019, Zhang stole 21 vials of biological research and attempted to smuggle them out of the United States aboard a flight destined for China. Federal officers at Logan Airport discovered the vials hidden in a sock inside of one of Zhang's bags and not properly packaged. It is alleged that initially Zhang lied to officers about the contents of his luggage, but later admitted he had stolen the vials from a lab at Beth Israel. Zhang stated that he intended to bring the vials to China to use them to conduct research in his own laboratory and publish the results under his own name. The charge for making false, fictitious, and fraudulent statements provides for a sentence of up to 5 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of up to $250,000. The charge for visa fraud provides for a sentence of up to 10 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of $250,000. The charge of acting as an agent of a foreign government provides for a sentence of up to 10 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of $250,000. Charge of conspiracy provides for a sentence of up to 5 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of another $250,000. The charge of smuggling goods from the United States, it provides a sentence up to 10 years in prison, 3 years of supervised release, and a fine of $250,000. Sentences are imposed by a federal district judge based on the U.S. sentencing guidelines and other statutory factors. Assistant Attorney General for National Security John C. Demers, U.S. Attorney Andrew E. Lelling, Special Agent in charge of the FBI Boston Field Division Joseph R. Bonavatlatona, Michael Denning, Director of Field Operations, U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Boston Field Office, Leigh Alistair Barzy, Special Agent in charge of the Defense Criminal Investigative Service, Northeast Field Office, Philip Coyne, Special Agent in charge of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Offices of its Inspector General, and William Higgins, Special Agent in charge of the U.S. Department of Commerce, Office of Export Enforcement at the Boston Field Office, made this announcement. Assistant U.S. Attorneys B. Stephanie Siegeman, Jason Casey, and Benjamin Tolkoff of Lelling's National Security Unit are prosecuting these cases with the assistant of trial attorneys William Mackey and David Aaron at the National Security Division's Counterintelligence and Export Control Section. The details contained herein are in the charging documents or allegations. The defendants are presumed innocent until and unless proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt in a court of law. These cases are part of the Department of Justice's China Initiative, which reflects the strategic priority of countering Chinese national security threats and reinforces the president's overall national security strategy. In addition to identifying and prosecuting those engaged in trade secret theft, hacking, and economic espionage, the initiative will increase efforts to protect our critical infrastructure against external threats, including foreign direct investment, supply chain threats, and foreign agents seeking to influence the American public and policymakers without the proper registration.
Yeah, so you can't fuck over the American people unless you have the proper registration. So, putting aside all the strange coincidences surrounding the coronavirus, I am reminded of the Boston Magazine article that we also looked at, dealing with Chinese espionage through the lens of a teacher. And I was rather disturbed to see just how self-serving this article was, especially with the opening, as the FBI continues hauling university scholars and researchers off in handcuffs for their work with the Chinese. Academics all over Boston are asking, am I next? A remarkable lack of self-awareness on the part of these supposed leaders.
We have this article by Catherine Elton in Boston Magazine entitled City of Spies. Subtitled, as the FBI continues hauling university scholars and researchers off in handcuffs for their work with the Chinese, academics all over Boston are asking, am I next? Are the rats leaving a sinking ship, I wonder? Charles Lieber had a brilliant mind, so it was widely assumed, at least among the rarefied upper echelons of the scientific community, that there would come a day when the esteemed Harvard nanoscientist would receive an early morning surprise from an unexpected caller, someone with a Norwegian accent telling him he'd won a Nobel Prize. No one, though, could have imagined the jolt he received on campus one cold January morning this year, just the second day of the spring semester, when FBI agents stormed the brick building that houses the Department of Chemistry and Chemical Biology, clutching an arrest warrant with his name printed on it. That's quite a way to start a spring semester. Surrounded by men with guns and badges, Lieber found himself listening to the unmistakable clink of handcuffs locking around his wrists. As 7 black vehicles simultaneously barreled down a winding road toward the professor's modest Lexington home to search it, agents in Cambridge loaded Lieber into a car and whisked him across the Charles to the Moakley Courthouse on the Boston waterfront, where federal prosecutors were waiting. His alleged crime: failing to report and later denying to government officials that he's receiving research funding directly from a Chinese university. Let's see. You're taking money from a foreign government and a foreign university, and you lied to federal officials about it. Oh, that's not a big crime, right? This is America. Lieber had long been involved in a lucrative and secret deal, according to the charging documents, which alleged that the head of Harvard's chemistry department was also a member of the Thousand Talents Plan, a Chinese government-sponsored recruitment initiative designed to reverse the country's decades-long brain drain. As part of the agreement, Lieber was eligible to receive a salary up to $50,000 a month, $158,000 for personal expenses, and a sum of $1.74 million in exchange for building a joint lab between Harvard and the Wuhan University of Technology in China. The goal, according to intercepted emails between Lieber and a contact of the Chinese university, was to cultivate young PhD students, set up international conferences, and apply for patents and publish papers in the Wuhan University of Technology's name. While it's certainly not illegal to take money from a foreign university, it is a federal crime to lie about it to U.S. government agencies that are also providing you funding, as the FBI alleges Lieber did. 2 days after his arrest, Lieber, who is facing up to 5 years in prison, posted $1 million cash bond and surrendered his passport to the court. Well, we had a presidential candidate lie about emails where intelligence that was classified was placed on it. So, we have kind of a culture where lying to federal officials about business dealings with the foreign government is not seen as all that serious and is not consistently prosecuted. So perhaps Lieber was making a calculated risk. Anyway, not a very good look on our universities, is it? Lieber is hardly the only academic who's awoken over the past few months to find himself staring down the barrel of a major federal effort targeting Chinese espionage. Several weeks before Lieber's arrest, Zheshang Zheng, a 29-year-old Chinese cancer researcher who was working at Beth Israel Deaconess, was making his way to his gate at Logan for a Beijing-bound flight when customs agents pulled his checked baggage aside for inspection. His nationality, destination, and place of work, as listed on his visa, set off alarm bells for an agency constantly on the lookout for Chinese theft and spying. Their hunch was confirmed the moment agents looked inside one of Zheng's bags and found 21 small vials containing DNA samples stuffed into a sock. Well, that's a good place to put them. In a scene ripped straight from the pages of a spy thriller, officers raced to Zheng's gate and intercepted him on the jetway just as he was about to flee the country with his secret illicit cargo. According to an FBI agent's affidavit, Zhang allegedly admitted later that he stole some of the vials and surreptitiously replicated others from someone else's research at the lab, all with the goal of continuing his research and publishing the findings under his name in China. As if stealing the vials wasn't bad enough, he was going to plagiarize at that. Didn't he hear about turnitin.com? Anyway, the day Lieber was arrested, authorities also released an international arrest warrant for Yang King Yi, former Boston University graduate researcher, who allegedly hid the fact that she was a member of the Chinese military when she applied for U.S. student visa, claiming she'd been collecting information for her superiors back in China. Wow. So I guess we're at the point where we allow intelligence agents from foreign militaries to be top researchers at our schools. Something tells me.
Sorry, that reminds me of didn't Nancy Pelosi have a confirmed Chinese intelligence asset as her secretary or something? Anyway, sorry to interrupt. Please continue.
I think it was Dianne Feinstein had that as her legislative aide and personal driver.
Thank you so much, Gandalf. He's always right there when I need him.
But it's lovely. I mean, it doesn't get better than trusting foreign military intelligence officers to be your personal assistants. Perhaps fitting, given Boston's demographics, this trio of recent cases all involved academics. But it's not just here that university campuses are engaging as the government's latest and most controversial frontier for rooting out Chinese espionage. From West Virginia to Kansas to Tennessee, scholars and researchers have been investigated, surveilled, and arrested. Frustrated by what they perceive to be a lax response to this threat in the past, many China experts have applauded Lelling's latest crackdown. After all, protecting the knowledge generated in academia is essential to securing our place at the top of the innovation food chain, not to mention as an economic juggernaut. Well, I'm thinking, why did we sell all of our manufacturing over to foreign countries 20 years ago if we were so concerned about that? But I digress. Some, however, say the recent uptick in federal prosecution unfairly targets the large population of Chinese and Chinese American scholars working in U.S. academic labs, as well as those, like Lieber, who work closely with scientists from China. As if you wouldn't look at the world's second largest economy that openly talks about dominating the world as a place of suspicion. They worry that law enforcement's newfound zeal could create a bigger problem than the one it seeks to solve. After all, limiting international collaborations with China, starving universities of Chinese funding, and scaring away Chinese scientists who have long been the greatest pool of talent for our university labs will only benefit China by handicapping our scientific efforts. That literally makes no sense. Shouldn't we be concerned about our own universities and cultivating our own talent?
Talent to do what exactly? Steal stuff and pass it off as your own? Is that a talent that is necessary for the continued economic juggernauthood of a country?
I don't know. I mean, unless we're talking about Chinese basketball players trying to rack up their steal totals for the Chinese Basketball Association, I don't know what the stealing is good for. What everyone can agree on, though, is that the arrests of Lieber and two other local academics signaled a clear escalation in the U.S. trade war with China, one trained right on Boston's ivy-draped college campuses. Lelling has demonstrated that he's unafraid of pursuing the theft of intellectual property, much of which is produced thanks to taxpayer-funded government grants. Whether it ultimately protects Boston's intellectual property or topples us from our place as a global leader in science, the offensive has the potential to upend how research is done on Boston's campuses, and in the process, fundamentally change one of the most innovative academic communities in the world. That is innovative in allowing new people to come in and steal everything you create. I mean, if there is no quality control and security to your innovation, the innovation will not be of much value proposition. There are spies among us, that much we do know. They are living unnoticed in tony suburban towns outside of Boston, working inside some of our cutting-edge industries, and teaching at our world-class universities. In 2011, for instance, a Devons-based energy technology company named the American Superconductor Corporation lost $1 billion in shareholder equity and was forced to cut 700 jobs. Why? Because Sinovel, a Chinese wind turbine manufacturing company that was one of American Superconductor's high-dollar clients, offered one of the company's engineers $1.7 million, an apartment in Beijing, an entree to women in exchange for giving them access to the U.S. company's proprietary technology. Once Sinovel had the technology, it canceled all of its orders, which it no longer had any use for. In 2018, meanwhile, the U.S. government charged a Chinese national living in Wellesley with falsifying documents to send sonar systems and hydrophones, which have export restrictions on them because they can be used in anti-sub warfare, to a military university in China. Both of these instances are clear local examples of how Chinese spies came to town and threatened U.S. economic and military supremacy. The cases against Lieber, Zhang, and Yi fit into a slightly different fedora and trench coat, but if you believe the FBI, they're just as insidious. On the day of Lieber's arrest, Joseph Bonavolonta, the FBI special agent in charge of the Boston field office, took to the podium at the front of a low-ceilinged room in the federal courthouse in the Seaport. While news cameras flashed, he told reporters that all three defendants were manifestations of the Chinese threat posed by the so-called non-traditional collectors, individuals who are not spies, but professors, students, and other local residents used to gather valuable information. All of the individuals charged today, he said, were either directly or indirectly working for the Chinese government at our country's expense. Well, I think one thing that this case is revealing is that we have a whole lot more people over here getting into business that I think the government has very little clue as to how deep the rot might go.
Doesn't this article give you the vibe that this is the rule, not the exception? Especially evidenced by that initial "Am I next?" foreboding quote slash. There's a certain pervasiveness that the tone of this article conveys, I think.
Oh, I think that's indisputable. I mean, and there's a lot of worry about if we continue to look at the rot and see what's under the hood, that the engine of innovation that is known as Boston's academic community might be more of an engine of espionage. And, the trust in these kind of institutions is based on a sense that they are working in the public interest, particularly if they take taxpayer-funded grants. And if really all that research is being put to Chinese companies and Chinese government to outcompete U.S. science and U.S. Companies, we have a problem indeed, don't we? Boston's professors and researchers, China experts say, are a key component of China's strategic plan to turn itself into a country that doesn't simply manufacture other nations' innovations, but one that develops innovations and produces them itself. That doesn't make any sense at all. They're still stealing anyway. For many years, China has employed illegal means of working toward this goal, including stealing IP and reverse engineered products. That approach has its limits, though, says James Mulvenon, a Chinese linguist who works closely with U.S. government agencies. Chinese engineers have proven adept at reverse engineering, he says, but they haven't appeared to, quote, fully understand the organic sort of innovation that was at the heart of the product, unquote. That's why, he says, China has begun investing in hundreds of recruitment initiatives, including the 1,000 Talents plan that Lieber was allegedly a part of. The goal of that program, he says, is to bring people to China and mine them for the intangible information they possess about particular technologies. Professor Lieber is a good example, he says, because it's one thing to steal the plans or the schematics of how to do really high-end material science, but it's even better if someone explains it right to you. On the face of it, a talent recruitment program does not sound nefarious, but experts say there are often hooks that allow the Chinese government to reel people in and squeeze them for sensitive or proprietary information. Roy Camphausen, a former Department of Defense official who is now president of the nonpartisan, nonprofit National Bureau of Asian Research, says that programs like these and the generous support they offer are used to create relationships with Chinese scholars and non-Chinese scholars like Lieber that the Chinese can later leverage to convince participants to provide access to specific intellectual property. He says there is a perception, real or not, among Chinese Americans that there are limits to their professional advancement in the U.S. because of racial biases. Chinese government, he says, manipulates these resentments and plays the nationalist card to entice them to go to China and bring IP with them. Who would have known that the R word is a grift even in China? Never could have guessed. Other times, the Chinese government will resort to even more pernicious means. State officials, Camphausen says, take advantage of the fact that so many Chinese and Chinese Americans working in the United States in strategic industry have family in China. The Chinese system can be brutal in the way it can press your families. They'll say, listen, your uncle, your nephew, your niece, whatever the case may be, needs to help us, or your life will be more difficult. Well, that seems a lot more like a mafia capo shaking down a family to get their relative overseas to turn something over, doesn't it? Meanwhile, Mulvanon and others have spent the better part of the past decade trying to make U.S. government officials aware of the dangers posed by talent recruitment programs. It wasn't until 2019, however, that people finally started paying attention. Well, gee, we've had a whole decade, and we already had an instance of a wind turbine company being totally eliminated. I thought this country was about green energy, or so we were told. That year, 2019, a Senate committee investigation found disturbing cases of those in talent recruitment programs acting suspiciously, setting up shadow labs in China that mimic the government-funded research they are pursuing in the United States, removing tens of thousands of electronic files before leaving for China, and filling patents based on research funded by the U.S. government, among other problematic behaviors. That same year, the National Institutes of Health announced it was investigating 180 scientists because of undisclosed relationships with Chinese universities. The National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, and other U.S. government grant makers did the same. Then the FBI admitted it had been asleep at the wheel and began focusing on universities, investigating and arresting academics for failing to disclose their participation in the 10,000 Talents Plan. None of them, however, were as prominent or well-known as Harvard's Lieber. Well, they were just too busy finding Hillary's emails, I'm sure. Back in April 2018, several Department of Defense G-men knocked on Lieber's door at Harvard. Over the years, the U.S. government had given Lieber $8 million to fund research at his lab, an interconnected network of offices, so-called wet labs, where experiments are undertaken, and dry labs, where computational work is done, that spans 2 floors and 2 buildings within the chemistry department complex. During the visit, the 1,000 Talents Plan came up in conversation. Lieber told the government officials that he had been to China and was familiar with the Chinese program, but was not a participant. After his guests left, Lieber felt rattled. That night, he tossed and turned, unable to sleep, worrying about the encounter while questions swirled through his mind. Months went by and nothing came of it, but the DoD investigators weren't the only ones poking around Lieber. In November of that year, officials from the NIH, which also had funded Lieber to the tune of some $10 million, reached out to Harvard with similar questions. When Harvard called Lieber to clear things up, he again denied his participation in the 1,000 Talents Plan and said he hadn't had a formal relationship with them since 2012. The Chinese university, told them, was falsely exaggerating their relationship. Surveillance of his email, though, indicated otherwise and formed the basis for his arrest more than a year later. Those damn emails, they get you every time. Lost in the hoopla surrounding his dramatic fall was the fact that Lieber has not been accused of espionage, nor was there any evidence that he transferred sensitive information to China. Even Lelling said he doesn't think Lieber is a spy. By the way, there is no evidence behind an internet conspiracy theory that Lieber invented the novel coronavirus and sold it to the Chinese. Nonetheless, making false statements to federal officials is a crime, even if the action the person lied about doesn't turn out to be unlawful. Neither Lieber nor his attorney responded to numerous interview requests. Well, When you lie about something as important as your foreign ties and foreign funding, while also receiving funding from your own home government, people tend to assume the worst, and the conspiracy theorists and the truthers will come out. Not everyone is convinced that hauling academics like Lieber off in handcuffs is a good idea. Sounds like someone is concerned for their own rear end. Critics of recent cases such as Lieber's accuse the government of quite literally making a federal case of what in many instances is merely a professor's failure to diligently fill out paperwork or desire to hide moonlighting from an employer. I mean, these professors already make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. That is a completely illegitimate argument. These infractions might ordinarily get academics reprimanded by their superiors, fired or banned from receiving federal grants, not, critics stress, arrested and thrown in jail. Well, the issue isn't federal grants from our government, it's grants from another government that might have its own agenda.
Isn't the issue also working on a contractual basis for not less than 9 months out of the year for a Chinese entity without declaring it and actually lying that it's even a thing? Isn't that the issue?
Oh yeah, it's a very serious issue. I mean, because you're basically cheating your main employer, which in this case is Harvard or some other Boston area university, out of your full efforts because you're getting paid as much or more under the table by somebody else. So in essence, Lieber, by doing this, and these other professors who are doing similar type of actions, are cheating their own universities, in addition to cheating the government with the funding. So anyway, Peter Zeidenberg is complaining that all these persecuted professors, and none of these recent cases, Zeidenberg says, involves accusation of passing sensitive information to the Chinese. But I'm thinking to myself, where there's smoke, there's fire. If someone's lying about working for a Chinese university for 9 months out of the year, when lots of other people who've been a part of the same network have been involved in stealing vials of lab material and not disclosing the fact that they're a lieutenant in a foreign army, for instance, we don't have much reason to trust. I mean, certainly innocent until proven guilty, but where there's smoke, there's fire, they say as well. What's more, Zeidenberg says, the rules surrounding academic partnerships haven't always been clear. For years, while universities encouraged professors to pursue international collaborations, they did little to emphasize the importance of funding disclosures. Suddenly, Zeidenberg says, making these disclosures, even about relationships formed years ago, is paramount. They've changed the paradigm midstream, and they go back and say, well, let's see what you reported in 2016 or 2008. At that time, this wasn't on anybody's radar, Zeidenberg explains. And now they're saying that the failure to report is critical, and it's not just, hey, you're doing it wrong, and if you do it wrong again, you could lose your job. They're saying you could go to prison for it. Perhaps the gravest concern among critics is the way this paradigm shift has almost exclusively affected Chinese and Chinese American researchers. When encouraged by their employers to set up international collaborations, these academics unsurprisingly look to China given their language skills and connections. Now, however, they are paying a price for it. Since China is the new strategic competitor, said Ariane Ong, a former civil rights attorney and a Washington, D.C. activist on this issue, all interactions with Chinese foreign nationals elevate these violations onto a different plane. In other words, says Andrew Kim, an attorney and law professor currently at South Texas Law College in Houston, Chinese scientists are now facing scrutiny for the new crime of researching while Asian. Oh, I just love all this. Woe is me. Let's not argue the facts. Let's just claim we're being discriminated against. His latest incarnation of what he believes is the U.S. government's biased targeting of Chinese people in the name of battling economic espionage. Well, economic espionage is happening. As proof, he points to a study he published last year in the Cardozo Law Review based on a sample of 187 individuals charged under the Economic Espionage Act. From 1997 to 2009, 17% of defendants were of Chinese descent. After 2009, that rate tripled to 52%. That proves absolutely nothing. There are lies, damned lies, statistics, and their scholarly journals. History has shown that many of the cases brought by the U.S. government are weak, especially, it turns out, when the defendant is Chinese. Kim's study found that 1 out of 5 Chinese defendants were acquitted, had their charges dropped, or were pushed to take a plea of a lesser charge, such as making a false statement. That happened nearly twice as often as it did for non-Asian defendants, 11% of whom were acquitted, meaning, Kim says, that authorities were more often bringing weak cases against Chinese defendants. Since the study's completion, some high-profile cases against scientists have also fallen apart to the embarrassment of the government. Zeidenberg again, unsurprised. This is what happens in law enforcement in general when you incentivize agents and prosecutors to bring certain kinds of cases. You end up bringing junk cases. Lelling defends the government, saying that in any new crime-fighting endeavor, there is a learning curve for building cases. Meanwhile, in the university world, Chinese and non-Chinese professors alike are increasingly confounded by the whole concept of academic spying. After all, while some universities have labs working on highly classified research, such as MIT's Lincoln Laboratory, the vast majority of university research, including Lieber's, is just basic research, which means it doesn't yet have commercial applications. What's more, scientists point out, in their infinite wisdom, the whole purpose of academic research is to publish their findings. Yes, behind paywalls that cost $30 an article. In fact, their jobs depend on it. Their jobs for whom depend on it, I want to know. No one needs to spy on them, they say. All their findings appear in academic journals for everyone to read, even people in China. So, the reporter then goes on and describes how he relentlessly talked to everybody. But I think we get the gist of the story here, don't we?
Yeah, I'm reminded of a personal anecdote wherein those of you who've been following the show know that I used to have a career as an audio and video analyst, which required me to be an expert in my field, which often involved me doing sort of cross-domain expertise conferences. I have a very salient memory of a gentleman telling me at one of those conferences that he had been to a different conference that was more of a high-tech conference, and that the major recruitment effort was to find people to fight the cyber war against China. And it was the first time I'd ever heard it. And this is probably going back, at least 8 years ago. So it's very interesting. See, and I thought just related to that part of the article where they said that the racism was the reason for the lack of institutional success for the Chinese in America. So I was thinking maybe they need to go to the Sino-Judaic Institute, because there's a literal Jewish Middle Eastern Studies program in China that Claire was actually telling me about. So I thought if they wanted to learn about all the ethnic suppression going on in the U.S., they could probably learn about it through the Sino-Judaic Institute. What do you think, Gandalf? You think this is a safe bet for aspiring globalist Chinese?
Well, if you can get Claire Carr behind it, I would bet my life on it.
So yeah, I thought it was important to bring that up. And I just wanted to call attention to this sort of weird, it almost seems like it's a self-fueled sort of mania. So we have these, I think it comes down to the not really understanding what the founding principles of the United States even are. So you have these institutions, right, that are Ivy League institutions, and these places, they make tons of money on, well, presumably from their tuition fees, which are considerably higher. And now I don't come from the US, so I can't speak to this, but Gandalf, are you aware of the difference in tuition price between these Ivy League schools and just a run-of-the-mill local colleges?
Well, a lot of state universities will often charge $30,000 a year. I mean, the price is even that's way too high for like a quality state school. But if I wanted to go to Harvard this year, tuition alone might be over $60,000, and I'm not even counting room and board.
And you're presumably getting some sort of value for this investment. So let's have a look at how these actions actually devalue that investment. So you have these people that rise to the top, like Lieber, who are creating a culture where you can kind of tell by the tone of this article that it's pretty pervasive that this is going on. If the first thing to come to people's mind is, am I next? Well, that implies it's a pretty darn pervasive thing. So just accepting kickbacks and undisclosed partnerships, aka arguably above the board spying and IP violations. Yeah, how does that work? Well, we've got these schools that have some type of prestige, right? Because people are willing to pay all that money to go there, presumably for some return later on. And by partnering with rivals and exporting that knowledge, that is making it sort of the same situation as the example of the engineer who was paid by a company who later canceled its orders to the company the engineer used to work for. So now that money is not going to be made there anymore. It's going to be made in China. And it's basically the same profile as exporting the industrial base to China, because short term, yeah, there's a profit to be made because you're going to save money on your manufacturing. But if the people in USA upon which your manufacturing is based can't afford anything because they can't have a job, well, that's not really a very sustainable model, is it? So I think what this is ultimately doing in the grand scheme of things is diminishing the prestige of these Ivy League schools. Did you have a comment on that, Gandalf?
Well, I am a dropout from an Ivy League school myself, and the quality even 10 years ago at the Ivy League schools was less than I had expected when I first went there. And if this article is any indication, I think the corruption and the rot in the last decade has accelerated considerably. And if the United States is going to have any sort of role in a high-tech economic future, if your universities can't be expected to have staff with enough integrity to protect the intellectual property produced by said universities, those universities will have no prestige eventually. And with the moves going on with, I know it's not an Ivy League school, but like Cal Berkeley and California schools not wanting to take the SAT, the constant movement towards social justice within and cultural Marxism within the Ivy Leagues. I mean, standards are being pressured downward all the time. I'm very fearful about the future of the U.S. Academy. I don't see it going well. I mean, in a decade from now, I don't think, especially with the economic crisis and students not going to be enrolling in school as much, I just see a long and scary ride down for academic prestige in America.
Yeah, let's hope they don't take too many other institutions down with them as this bubble predictably bursts.